Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today I have a duel for you. Yes, duels. We're back. We're doing some more duel content. And yes, I can confirm 100% that you are still allowed to do them. There's going to be more on that at the end of the video. But today we have a duel between Sam Ryals and Gabriel Pottebaum. I hope that's how you say your name. And it is going to be a duel of messers. So we are going to have a really cool fight. We got 7 nice exchanges, and we're going to have some more hand animated lightsaber arrows for you that I have to painstakingly create for hours. So for our first exchange, we have the usual first exchange footwork battle, where both fencers are moving in and out of each other's range, trying to see what kinds of things the other person will react to. And the first to make a move is Sam. He comes into range with a little bit of a flourish. The idea with attacks like these is that you want to provoke your opponent into maybe throwing something back. So Sam comes in, he throws a cut that was clearly not going to land, and as he is in his downward position on the side of his cut, Gabriel recognizes that he is not in range to throw anything of his own and moves into a position to parry the follow-up cut that he knows is coming, which Sam, of course, immediately throws. So Sam comes in, throws his flourish, then throws a follow-up strike towards the hand, which Gabriel looks to go to parry. However, it seems as though Sam's strike, even the follow-up one, was still not quite close enough to reach the target, which means that there is no blade-on-blade contact. So after Sam misses a little bit wide on his hand shot, Gabriel now uses this opportunity to throw a counter shot in to seize on the advantage of Sam being just that little bit out of position, having just thrown his own attack. Next up, we have a pretty exciting exchange that is a lot more clear this time. And after both fencers move in and out of distance once again trying to figure out what kinds of things they can maybe get for free, Sam explodes forward with a nice big head cut. That head cut, unfortunately, gets immediately parried by Gabriel in a hanging position, at which point Gabriel throws a short edge cut along the backside, kind of like a Zwerkow, toward the backside of Sam's head. Now Sam, realizing that he has been parried and he has now this time severely overcommitted to his initial cut, attempts to use a little bit of an overrunning maneuver. The idea here being that once you've committed that much forward momentum, there's not much you can do to try to stop yourself. And if you do manage to stop yourself, well, you're stopping yourself in a position where you can't really defend yourself. So instead, what you do is you try to run past your opponent, put your sword into a place where it maybe might be able to protect you a little bit, and hope that it works out. But it doesn't look like it quite worked out this time around, and Gabriel gets a nice clean shot to the top of the right shoulder of Sam as he runs by. On our third exchange, we get some good old-fashioned messer grappling. Now, the way this sequence initiates is Gabriel sort of throws a little bit of a feinted cut, again, just trying to get into range, and then from a very standard starting position, just throws a nice thrust right towards Sam's head. Now, Sam tries to lean out of the way and does look like he successfully gets far enough back to make it so that thrust just can't quite reach his face. After realizing that the thrust has not made it all the way, he then windshield wipers his left hand off into the sword, batting it off to the side and trying to control it in a nice little grapple. However, it doesn't look like he was able to get a good grip on his opponent's sword, and what that means is that after he swipes Gabriel's sword out of the way, Gabriel is able to return to a high Vom-Tog style position with his sword over his head at the exact same time as Sam, who was obviously trying to get that grapple and then was going to follow it up with a cut of his own, starts his own cut from a very similar position. And at this point, we have to really watch and be careful with the slow-mo here, because what we're looking for is who hits who and who wins that bind that initiates when both swords end up colliding together. Now, if we look very carefully, what we can see here is that as Gabriel is coming in with his own cut, it comes in very vertically. It comes in very vertically, and it looks like it does make contact with Sam's mask. At the exact same time, Sam's follow-up cut of his own comes in much more horizontally, and it does look like it makes some contact onto the upper arm, or maybe even the lower arm of one of Gabriel's hands. But the problem here is that the bind that is engaged when a vertical and a horizontal blade are coming at each other always emphasizes the vertical cut. And the reason for that is a couple of things based on physics and body mechanics. But the basic idea here is that if we watch carefully again and again, no matter how many times I watch it, I can't see the quality from Sam's cut here to be particularly good, whereas I can always see an angle or an interaction where the cut from Gabriel is definitely very good. So in my opinion, I'm going to give this exchange to Gabriel for the clean cut to the head in the grapple, even though, of course, it was pretty darn close. Now, the next exchange is not a particularly exciting one, but still a pretty nice execution of some fundamentals of fencing. And what happens is a sneaky little hand cut. But this is also an opportunity to talk about some of the nuances of messer fencing. And as most people know, messers tend to have virtually zero hand protection. Now, in a lot of one-handed fighting systems, the standard guard you're going to take is one exactly like you're seeing Gabriel hold here. Just a arm straight out in front of you, sword above your head. And the general idea of a guard like this is what you're essentially telling your opponent is, you can come in wherever you want, but what you can know for sure is that I'm going to come straight down onto your head or onto your shoulder if you even get into my range. And normally this is where these provoking strikes that we've been seeing earlier on in the exchanges work out so well. It helps get people out of that position so that you don't end up doubling. But Sam here kind of calls Gabriel's bluff. As Gabriel is standing in this position, Sam goes up underneath for a little short edge cut to the bottom of the hand. Now, normally this would be the position exactly where Gabriel's threat of I'm going to come straight at your head would pay off pretty nicely. Because of course, if you just get nicked on the bottom of the arm as you're chopping into somebody's skull, most of the time people are going to give you the advantage of that exchange. But that's not what happens here. Instead, Gabriel, who was a lot more defensively minded maybe than his guard would have suggested, tries to parry the cut to the bottom of his arm. And as you could probably guess, using a sword that has absolutely zero hand protection on the bottom and virtually none on the top as well, it's pretty darn impossible to use the sword to protect the bottom of your arm from an incoming attack. What would have worked out a lot better, of course, is if Gabriel had simply lifted his arm further into the air and then brought it down onto Sam's head. And of course, there's always the option of just cutting him in the head anyway. So for this next exchange, we have a really exciting one again. And it's exciting because there's a whole lot of almost mini exchanges in the midst of this normal exchange. And the idea of mini exchanges here is that there's just things where people had opportunities or made attempts to land. And the beauty here is in the ability for both fencers to ward off those attacks. There's something very early on where both fencers go for each other's hands and they just don't quite make it to anything good. There's another one later on where Gabriel goes for a cut on the offside and Sam parries it in an absolutely picture-perfect offside hanging parry. There's another little mini exchange where both come forward with a little bit of a thrust, but it looks like they realize that they were both just going to try to stab each other, so they kind of back off, and Sam goes for a cheeky little hand snipe that he's not in distance to make. But eventually, we get to the exchange that ends up with some points. And in this exchange, we have another instance of an initiated thrust. But before we get to the thrust, I have to talk about Gabriel's stance here. Now, this entire time, Gabriel has been left-handed. I know, horrible. And he's been fencing with his left leg forward. And this is pretty typical of one-handed weapons because you just want your tools and your defensive options to be as close to your opponent as possible. But there is an instance here right before the exchange begins where Gabriel switches his feet. He pulls his left leg back and thus his left arm back, and he puts himself in a very defensive position. But I don't necessarily think that this is as useful as it might appear. The problem is that in something like Messer, having another target be available to hit is a really, really rough disadvantage to overcome because the weapon itself is so limited in defensive capabilities. There's no buckler in your other hand. There's no armor on your other shoulder. And that means when you put something that can't defend itself because it doesn't have a weapon on your side that's closest to your opponent pretty much has an obligation to shoot for it. Now, that being said, this might have been an intentional tactic by Gabriel. The idea being that if you present such a juicy target like a side that doesn't have a sword in it to your opponent, well, then you're thinking, okay, well, that's definitely where they're going to attack, and maybe I can do something about that. But Sam doesn't take the bait. Instead, Sam full sends a thrust to the left side of Gabriel, which, as we just said, is pulled back a little bit and looks like he lands it directly into the neck right as it meets the shoulder. Now, after the stab lands, there is an attempt by Gabriel to both parry it off to the side and then shove Sam's hand away in order to try to get something of his own. And he does manage to get that little bit of an afterblow thrust into Sam's side, as Sam, of course, pulls back out of the overrun position he puts himself in and lands another little follow-up stab of his own. But in my opinion, both of these follow-up stabs are out of tempo from the initial one because at the end of the day, Sam came forward with a stab. There was definitely an attempt to parry from Gabriel, and it was after that failed parry attempt that he managed to land something of his own, which means that it is, of course, one tempo after he got hit and out of tempo in terms of scoring. Now, so far in this fight, we've had some pretty clean exchanges from both fencers, but no real indication that either one of them has had a kind of leg up advantage on the other one in terms of distance or timing or tactics. That is until this exchange. Now, in this exchange, we see a pretty interesting interaction here, where Gabriel is coming forward into range in a pretty standard Messer fighting stance, and Sam throws a little bit of a poke towards his arm. Now, this is a really important interaction here because it tells you a lot about the mindset of both of these fencers going into exchanges in general, because in a Messer fight, it is just all too common for things to end up as doubles, and it's specifically because of fencers not doing what we're seeing these fencers do here. One of the issues that can happen a lot in Messer fencing is that you come forward with your sword raised, you eat a shot, and then you throw a shot, and because the swords are so small and have no cross guards and have no bell guards, that it's basically impossible to land a hit and end up in a position where you can prevent your opponent from hitting you somewhere. So what happens a lot is that you have to utilize stop thrusts, and that's exactly what we see Sam do here. As Gabriel is coming forward, he's clearly threatening with the intent that he is going to throw a big cut straight towards Sam's head, and Sam is stopping that momentum, that forward pressure, by just gesturing with his sword forward enough to say, hey, if you just come forward, I'm going to stab you, and then I'm going to do everything I can to wind my sword towards wherever yours is in the hopes that I manage to parry the afterblow that is obviously going to come. And if you're good enough at that kind of thing, it can pretty reliably keep you safe. So Gabriel, immediately recognizing that that's the kind of thing that Sam is trying to do, stops his momentum, stops his forward attack, and then has to reset for it. Just a couple milliseconds. And that amount of time is all it takes for Sam to then get out of range of a continued attack, and then throw up a very nice parry for when Gabriel does renew his attack and his momentum forward and throw that one cut he was so clearly keen on throwing in the beginning. Without this stop thrust, there's a pretty good chance that Sam, who was standing in a pretty low guard when the interaction started, might not have been able to get there in time in order to protect himself. So that little bit of a threat of a stop thrust was exactly what he needed to get himself the distance and the time in order to stay safe in the next interaction that was to come. So Gabriel, who of course is now throwing his cut exactly as he wants to, throws it, lands directly into the guard of Sam, who does a very clean saber-style parry riposte, hitting Gabriel directly in the head. Now, after this happens, Gabriel continues forward, throws a nice afterblow towards the body, but just like in the last exchange, it is out of tempo because the failed parry that he tried to put up earlier was his tempo for when he got hit in the head, and now this one is, of course, one tempo out and no longer countable. Now, at this point, we have reached the final exchange, and as I've had the score up on the screen this entire time, you know that in that last exchange, at least in my mind, Sam has pulled ahead in this bout. But the problem is that he has not pulled ahead to such a degree that he can't lose yet. And in this particularly last exchange, we see a really messy but interesting interaction. Now, Gabriel comes into range, as he has before, with his sword in a very default position, but Sam has been staying in a low guard a lot of this time, and in a way trying to bait his opponent into throwing a big cut over the top when he's outside of range. But that's not what ends up happening. Instead, he tries to use the stop thrust tactic that he used in the previous exchange to stop Gabriel's momentum once again and hopefully get him to overcommit, same as before. But instead of going for a stop thrust, to the torso or maybe the inner side of the left arm, he throws it towards the knee in a way. And this particular kind of stop thrust is one that can be parried and be parried quite easily, and that's exactly what Gabriel does. He does a little bit of a C parry, flips his blade upside down, and shoves Sam off to his left side. From this position, there's not a lot of great options to do. Gabriel's sword is pointed down, and while he could maybe pull his tip up and try to thrust into the body, you already know that after Sam has been pushed off to his right side, his arm is already in the process of circling up to a high guard position from which he can throw a big cut. And if you stab low, it doesn't matter if you push them off to the side there to begin with. If they're going to cut you in the head on a high line and you're going to thrust low, you're both just going to get hit. So instead of doing this, Gabriel attempts to come up into the high line as well in order to get into a more dominant position. position. The problem is that Sam's follow-up cut is already coming, and it looks like it comes in so far shallow and horizontal on the left side that it manages to hit Gabriel in the right hand. At the exact same time as this is happening, Gabriel, who obviously brought his hand up there just in case he would need it to grapple, throws the follow-up cut that he was obviously preparing at this exact same time, and it looks like it lands skimming off the front of Sam's mask, maybe getting a little bit of shoulder, and then most certainly getting a little bit of ground once it follows all the way through. But the question is, how do you rule this? Now, the rule set here was supposed to be 2 points for deep targets, 1 point for shallow, after blows being deductive, removing only at least 1 point. And the issue here is that, in my mind, both of these fencers were attacking simultaneously, more or less. There is no very clear parry or change of priority that would happen that would make somebody the initial attacker and somebody else the afterblower. So in my mind, a double should probably result in no points for anyone. But if we use the rules exactly as they're written, one in which an afterblow can only deduct 1 point, I would actually say that we should give 1 point to Gabriel here, because Gabriel's attack hit more of the upper 2-point targets than Sam's did, and if we consider Sam's the afterblow in this instance, just purely for math reasons, we would deduct 1 point from Gabriel's hit, giving him 1 point total. And now the score is 4-4 and a tie. But if you don't want to do the rules that way, and you do it the way I think most people would normally do it, you would say that this exchange was a complete double where nobody gets any points and Sam is the winner 4-3. So if you disagree with my assessment, feel free to rage down in the comments, though you're going to have to contend with my lightsaber arrows to do so. And if you would like to see more HEMA ratings duels, well, this is the part of the video where we talk about that. So if you made it this far in the video and you want to have a HEMA duel of your own, there are a couple of pieces of criteria that you need to be aware of if you want it to end up on HEMA ratings. And here I've got the extra rules right next to me. But if you're reading them and you're not quite sure what they're supposed to mean, here's a pretty clear example of how you can basically fulfill all the criteria for free. And the idea is that you partner it with a tournament that you're already at. And that's exactly what Sam and Gabriel did here. They were at Donnybrook. And the idea is that if you are using tournament staff, the medic, the venue, the judges, the directors that are already there running a legitimate tournament, then all of that legitimacy passes on to your duel. And the reason these rules are here is because, unfortunately, there are a lot of people in the world who would absolutely invent duels just to boost their own rating. And the thing is that the good people at HEMA Ratings actually put a lot of effort into trying to verify whether or not these things are real. And if you are, whether you think so or not, skirting those parameters and those rules, your duel, your tournament is going to get thrown out and not counted. So if you want your duels to count, partner them with a tournament. Tell the tournament organizer ahead of time that you're going to run this duel, make sure that they know about it, and make sure that when they submit their results to HEMA Ratings for the tournament that they just ran, that they include your duel that somewhere down there at the bottom, indicate that it's a duel, and it's probably going to end up there, no sweat. Then HEMA Ratings can do all the normal things that they do to try to verify that the tournament was real, and your duel will be included in that verification. So that's all I got for today. I'll be back next week with more stuff, and hopefully I'll be getting some more duel footage in the future.